Welcome to the 64th BFI London Film Festival in partnership with American Express and this LFF Screen Talk with Academy Award-winning actor and filmmaker George Clooney. It gives me great pleasure, and wherever you are watching, I think we should all put our hands together and welcome Mr. George Clooney. I'll give you a clap, sir.
Oh, thank you here, because it's your one hand clapping.
If you listen carefully, you can hear
everybody around the world listening.
I hear my mother-in-law. I can hear my mother-in-law.
Thank you for doing this, sir. How are you?
Edith, it's good to see you. I'm fine. We're stuck in Los Angeles right now. I haven't moved, so this is the closest I get to getting out. So I'm wearing nothing from the waist down, by the way.
Me too. You got the memo. Listen, it's wonderful because we're going to take a kind of trip through a number of your films, and we'll go back in time in just a little while. But I'd really like to start by talking about your new film, which I had the absolute pleasure of watching the other night, The Midnight Sky. And I wanted to ask, first of all, where you first, what first attracted you to the story and how you first came about it. Had you read Lily's book?
I hadn't read the book. The guys at Netflix sent it over to me to act in it. It's a good part, it's a good part for me. And I read it and I loved it. And I thought, I actually rather take a swing at directing it. And I had an idea of what I wanted to do. I'd done a couple of space movies. I did one with Alfonso and I did one with Steven Soderbergh. So I knew how complicated the space stuff was going to be. But this one felt like a really intimate story about, what mankind is capable of doing to mankind in a very personal way. And I thought, and I also liked the idea of a story about redemption. And I felt like this was the ultimate story of redemption. So I sort of pushed those guys to do it. We shot it on 65 so that we would take it to the IMAX and show it on these giant screens. And you got to watch it on a computer about that big, right?
I got my big telly. It was here.
It makes me feel. I feel so much better about that. They were kind enough to let us make the film we wanted to make, which is not a particularly easy thing to. These kind of films aren't easy to get made. As you could imagine.
Did you approach it almost a bit like two films, because you do have these almost two elements to it, where you have your character Augustine and kind of his journey on Earth, and then you have this wonderful collection of scientists and who are up there doing their thing. Did you kind of approach it in two?
I kind of had to. I shot all of my stuff first with this massive, David Letterman beard going on, and shaved my head. My wife was really happy when the movie was over. But we started shooting in Iceland, which was rough. It was about 40 degrees below zero and 70-mile-an-hour winds, which you can see. And it was hard to shoot, physically hard to shoot. And then we went to Shepperton in London and shot out all of my stuff. We started shooting in October. We finished that stuff by the first of the year. And then we started, after that, we did it gave us a chance to sort of build the other sets, which we were in the process of building, which was the space stuff, which was a much more complicated set pieces that we were building. In the middle of it, by the way, Felicity called me. It was in the middle of I think I was in the middle of Iceland, really miserable.
Wow.
And I get a call from Felicity and she goes, "So there's news." And I go, "What's the news?" She goes, "I'm pregnant." And I'm like, "Great." And then I go, "Okay, that complicates things." And she was so gung-ho. She wanted to do all the wire work and everything. She said, "I'll be all right." And I was like, no, we're not putting anybody pregnant on a wire. Initially we started out trying to shoot all of that stuff with just doing a head replacement, which is an awkward thing to do, where you shoot it 3 times with a body double and stuff. And eventually we sat down with her and said, people go away for 2 years on a flight to another planet. They have sex, happens, you're pregnant. And it changed everything for us. It actually gave us a sort of something to lean into for the end of the movie, which I think it ends up being a real bonus for us along the way.
That's a wonderful thing to have as a director, though, is a kind of, you know, an open mind and a consideration for your cast. You know, not everybody would have reacted in that way, and see and worked around a situation, and like, as you say, something fruitful and beautiful to come out the other side.
Do you
of
know,
it.
I used to do improv, and one of the things you learned in improv is you can never say no, because if you say no, the improvisation just dies immediately. You know, if you say, well, you know, you know, you're a 7'3" brunette, and if you just go, no, I'm not, then the improv is done. You just stop. You know, you have to go, yes, and yes, and.
Yeah.
And as a director, you sort of learn that that's a process that really comes in handy when you know, things change. You know, from a book to a script to a film, they change. You know, some things don't work the same, and so you have to, you know, and when environments change, you know, you have to change. You have to go with the flow. And the secret is to not make it a curse, but make it a blessing, and say, okay, well, how do we make that? How do we turn this into something really special and positive? And we found a way, you know.
As a director at the minute, would you say that you're at a point where you've accumulated all this knowledge from everything you've done so far, both in front of the camera and behind, and to that point where you know and you've learned a lot of what to do, but also what not to do? Is it kind of you bring everything with you?
You keep thinking you've learned what not to do, and then you keep doing some of the things that you think you've learned what not to do. You know, and I've had an interesting career. You know, I've had incredible successes and incredible failures as a director and as an actor. And the funny thing about that is, it actually gives you it puts you in a position where you don't get pigeonholed into, like, as an actor. I've had success, but I've never been like, I was never a big action guy. I never was a huge, you know, huge comedy guy. So it's sort of, because none of them ended up being gigantic hits, it sort of allowed me to just keep messing around and being able to do very, very different kind of performances. And directing has been some of the same, which is, you know, some of the less successful films, in a way, have allowed me the chance to continue to try other things, you know, which has been fun. This is pretty different than anything I've done before.
Did becoming a director change anything about you as an actor?
Yeah,
And how did it help you as an actor?
Yeah, it makes me dislike directors.
How did being an actor?
I remember I was doing one of those round tables. I think it was for it was for Good Night and Good Luck when I directed. And so you're doing that sort of the round table where you're talking with a bunch of other directors. And one of the directors there was like, I like to wear an actor down. I want to do 50 takes until they have nothing left, and then I get. And I looked over and I was like, I'll never work with you as an actor, you schmuck. But you know, it's a funny thing. Look, I learned from, you know, the Coen brothers and Soderbergh and Alexander Payne and directors who I greatly admire. I learned a lot of what the things that work and why they work. And you try to steal from the best. You know, you try to steal from the people who really know what they're doing along the way. Jason Reitman was a wonderful director. You know, I've been lucky that way.
It is incredible when you look at the list of directors that you've worked with, and you know, and a selection of those that you've worked with on numerous occasions as well. And interesting to see the characters that they facilitate you with to play with in a way as well. That's kind of always interesting to
It's
see.
a pretty funny thing, you know. The Coen brothers just want me to be an idiot, whatever it is. They just want to make fun of me, which is funny. And Soderbergh was always sort of challenging stereotypes in a way too, and then, you know, Alexander and Jason were sort of playing off of perceptions of what people thought I was, which I thought sort of is always fun. It's fun to do. It's tricky. A lot of times people go, "Oh, you were just playing yourself," and you're like, "Oh, okay." But yeah, you know, I've been really lucky. You know, I've been able to work with some spectacular directors, and more than that, really great people. I mean, you know, as we're sitting in this completely changed world, we're finding that we're looking for, you know, it's not just about coronavirus, it's about all the anger and all of the hatred and stuff. You're finding that you really are looking for kindness and somebody being supportive, and those kind of things around the rest of your life. and they become
Yeah.
more and more and more important, I think. And that's something that the directors that I most enjoy working with have always had that as a quality.
Also, I imagine though, finding your kind of team that you work with behind the camera, in terms of, whether it be your fellow producers or your DOPs or your team that you take with you on set, finding the people that you not only click with kind of on a creative level, but you, as you say, creating that nice environment that's positive, that's encouraging, that's...
Well, Grant and I met Grant Heslov in acting class. He was 19 and I was 21. And we became partners.
Just last week.
Yeah, it was like a couple years ago. And we became partners, and we started trying to get movies made forever. We couldn't get anything done. We tried to get television series done. And eventually things changed, and we and all the way to winning the Oscar together with Argo. We've been partners for a long time. And he always sits next to me, and he's a good sounding board, because when you're shooting, particularly if you're shooting yourself in a film, if you're directing yourself, if you have any modesty at all, you would never do more takes on yourself than you would on everybody else, And so I usually do 1 or 2 takes and move on. I work really quickly, and I plan it out ahead of time. And so I'll do like 1 take and go, okay, that's fine. And I'll come back to the chair, and Grant will be sitting there going, do another take, dude, do another take. And so it is fun to have people that I'm, almost all of the crew that I work with are people that I've been working with for 20 years or something like that.
Mm. Well, with Midnight Sky, for your for your film within the film, it's very solitary. It is very pretty much mostly just you.
Yeah. Well, Kaylin's there.
Yeah, but in terms of, is that, I don't know, do you feel a freedom in that?
Well, it's weird because it's there were a lot more lines written, and we just took them out. We felt like it was more of a silent film. It's kind of like there's a Jackie Gleason film called Gijo that kind of had that. There's a real advantage when it's just you. I played a pediatrician on ER when I did ER, and I was a drunk and a womanizer and all these horrible things. But at the end of every episode, I'd sort of stick up for some kid, and then people go, "Oh, he loves kids." So I could get away with anything as long as I still love kids. And so having Kaylin there in those scenes allows you the ability to be angrier, to be these sort of long moments of quiet actually play out in a different way than if it was just you by yourself. And believe me, she's every bit an actress. This is her first real acting job, but I mean, I think maybe I did more than 1 take on her, maybe like 3 times. I mean, it actually blows a hole in all of, if there's any actors watching, our bullshit is now out, because all this stuff of like, I got to prepare, and, it's a crying scene, and I got to kill my parents in my head and all this stuff. I'd say to this little girl, okay, I want your really sad, scary face. And she'd be like, oh. And I would go, yeah, exactly like that. And so she's outed us all as at 7. First day of shooting, we were in Iceland on the glacier, and it literally was 40 below and 70-mile-an-hour winds, and she's covered in everything, and she jumped right in, and she's a tough little kid, man.
Amazing. Brilliant. Listen, I had such a hard job when they said, can you pick 6 George Clooney films? And I was like, no.
Can you pick 2?
There's too many.
No, but genuinely, there's too many. But so you have, which is amazing. And I love that you've picked Out of Sight.
Yeah.
Because I love that film, and I rewatched it again last night, and it's such a great film. Really is.
It's an interesting film. Steven Soderbergh, who'd had all the success with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, was coming off of a couple of flops. And I was coming off of Batman and Robin. And we both needed a success. We were sort of, our backs were against the wall in a way. And I was still doing ER at the time, and there was always these conversations about whether you can go from television to film. And it was a big deal.
Wow.
And it was a hard, and I was losing that argument. And after Batman and Robin, I sort of realized that I was going to be held responsible for the movie, not just for the performance. And so we waited, and when I found that movie, we chased Steven down to direct it. There was a director attached, and he walked away because he said I wasn't a movie actor. And then
Oh,
it's okay, it all works out. And Steven, we met with Steven at Danny DeVito's house and said, "Are you interested?" And he goes, "I know how to do this." And he sort of, his vision of it was to take the studio system that that had sort of gotten a little stale, and inject all of that independent world that he'd been so steeped in into it, and shoot it like an independent film, like the studios used to do in the 70s. And that's why Out of Sight has this really sort of beautiful flow to it. And he just directed the hell out of that movie. He did a beautiful job with it.
I mean, Jack's a really interesting character. It's really, watching it last night, and even things like, the lighter and the signet rings, and you make assumptions about him as a character, even from the start when you see those, and they're kind of, and the way that he kind of, seduces the clerk. I love that line where he goes, "This is your first time being robbed, Letitia, yeah, Loretta." And it's like, oh, it's such a great line, and just the way it's delivered as well.
Well, we had fun. That was, I mean, look, there were so many. I mean, look at the cast in that thing. Don Cheadle, just people who just came in and just knocked it out of the park. Isaiah Washington, and Jen was spectacular in it. And it was one of those movies where everybody was really right for the part. Steve Zahn was really right for the part and great in it, and Ving, and then and then it was really, it was, people had been adapting Elmore Leonard movies, and they didn't quite work, because when you adapt an Elmore Leonard film, usually when you're adapting a film from a book, you kind of take the plot, right? And you're going, oh, let's take the plot. Well, plots in Elmore Leonard books don't matter. It's the characters. It's all that matters. And Scott Frank, who adapted it, really understood that. And he did Get Shorty just before that, which was the first Elmore Leonard book that worked on film. And so then he adapted this one, and he really nailed it. He did a beautiful job and really understood how to focus on, it's a diamond heist. It doesn't really matter. What mattered was all the, White Boy Bob and all the crazy characters like that.
I love Dennis Farina as Jens. I mean, it's so subtle. The performances, they're just so rich, but they almost like, there's a effortlessness almost with so many of them.
If you ask Steven, and he's directed, I don't know, 30 films or something, but if you ask him his best film that he's made, he would say Out of Sight. And I think for us both, even though it wasn't a very successful film at the time, it was critically successful, but for us both, it changed the trajectory in a way of our careers. First of all, it partnered us together for 10 years, and we did a lot of really interesting things together. But it also gave us this, it kind of got us back in the game of like, okay, they do know what they're doing. They're just, they just had a rough time of it earlier.
Do you mind if we talk specifically about the trunk scene?
Because
it's really, the dialogue's just got this great kind of sort of rhythm to it, and with David Holmes' score on the top of that, it's almost like a kind of jazz riff in the way that the conversation's going. And whilst you were filming that, what was the kind of reality of I'm assuming you weren't in a trunk, but what was the kind of?
They built a trunk and put it on a gimbal, just the trunk. Yeah. And then they closed the door and they gave me the flashlight. So I was doing all the lighting with the flashlight. It was an interesting thing though. Steven had a theory, and his theory was, I want us to get in the trunk, and when they get in the trunk, they're enemies, and by the time they get out, they're in love. And I think about it like a 9-page scene. It's a long scene. So he wanted to do it all in one shot. Thing is bouncing around, we're lighting, got to get the lines right, got to get everything right. We shot all day. This has never happened before or since. We shot all day to get it right, and we never got it. For a whole day of shooting, 12 hours, 13 hours of shooting, 50 takes, never got it right. Went home, we were all depressed. We came back the next morning, we shot it. First take, I think second take, got it, nailed it. Okay, let's go home. Finished the movie. I was about to start another film, and Steven called me up and said, we got to go back and reshoot the trunk scene. I was like, are you out of your mind? And he said, no, it's an interesting thing that happened, which was the theory that you go in there and you just stay with them. The truth of the matter is, it actually didn't let enough time happen that you could fall in love. You needed to cut outside to Ving driving and other things happening and cut back in to give it some time, because otherwise it actually felt too fast and she felt too shallow that she could fall for him that quickly. So we had to go back in and shoot it in pieces. I wanted to kill him. We could have done that all along. But it's a classic scene. It's the only line I improvised in the whole movie was, I said I want to do the Albert or the Peter Finch line. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. I said, but I want to quote it wrong, but really confidently. So he said, like what? And I go, yeah, like that movie with, Network, and, yeah. And then we talk, and then I say, yeah, I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take any more of your shit. And it just made me laugh that he was so confidently wrong about it. It's the only thing I got to put in the movie.
I love that about it, and it makes sense because giving them time, but also those little flickers of privacy almost as well, so that you are, pulling away from them, so you don't know what's happening for those few moments that you're on them drive. It's really clever.
Build some time,
even though you hate him for it.
Yeah, they're gonna kill him later.
Can we talk about Oh Brother, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary?
I can't believe, honestly, it's pretty shocking because it feels like it was yesterday. That movie, so after Out of Sight, I went to do Three Kings, and I got a call from Joel and Ethan, and they said, where are you? And I said, I'm in Arizona. And they go, can we come? And I'd never met these guys before. They were coming off of Fargo, had just come out. I mean, they're gods. I mean, starting with, Raising Arizona and before and before that.
Hudsucker Proxy and all that.
I mean, everything they touched was just spectacular. And I was like, I couldn't believe they were bringing me a script. And then I read it and couldn't believe the part that they were going to give me, which Everett McGill. And I remember I was nervous, and we got to, I think it was Jackson, Mississippi, to work. And the very first day of shooting is this scene where I'm sitting on the ground, and Tim Blake Nelson and I are sitting there eating corn, and John Goodman, who I'd worked with years ago on the show Roseanne. And so John Goodman is standing up there plucking branches off a tree, and he's about to bash me in the head with a stick. And I'm like, what are you doing, Big Dan? And I was doing it, and I was playing him like an idiot, because these guys are three of the dumbest, guys in the world. And it was my first take, I think, and I finished it. And Joel and Ethan they do one take, and they never give you notes. It's really like they laugh usually. I didn't know any of that at the time. And they come over, and Joel just goes, yeah, George, Everett, he's the smartest guy in the room, always. And I was like, oh. And I was playing him like a dumb guy, which of course was the wrong thing to do. And from that moment on, everything you did was like, well, apparently you fellas don't know what you're talking. And the minute it got to be that, it was easy, So they're really smart, astute filmmakers and beautiful writers, and I mean they're just masters.
It's such a wonderful, almost kind of real physical performance as well, in terms of there's so much kind of accentuation of movements and facial expressions and almost kind of cartoon-like in a way.
Yeah.
And it's just a wonderful, almost kind of childlike approach to it in a way. It's beautiful. It's
close to being over the top, but a lot of getting knocked around. The fun part was there was a sequence at the end where we're singing Man of Constant Sorrow on the stage, and they brought in a choreographer to like work on the dance moves for us. And I was like, I'm from Kentucky, and I kind of have, I think I have a move. And the guy was like, I don't think so. And I was like, yeah, I kind of think I do. So I did this horribly, like this chicken dance, and Joel and Ethan, you can actually hear it on the track of them like honking, laughing. So I knew I was probably ending my career, but I also knew that the dance worked pretty well. And but the whole thing was, the whole thing felt like a cartoon in a way, and it was so much fun. and a real family again. I remember before we started shooting, T-Bone Burnett, who's the music guy, brilliant music guy, music producer, came to me and he brought me the song Man of Constant Sorrow. And he goes, learn this song. I go, okay. And I worked on it, worked on it. And he assumed that I could sing because my aunt is Rosemary Clooney. And I assumed I could sing because I always thought I could sing. And so I practiced and I had that thing down. And then we went down to, Nashville to record it at a recording studio. And there's, T-Bone Burnett and Joel and Ethan behind the glass, and I'm in my glass booth and I start to sing. And, it sounds like a cat caught in the wheel well of a car, and I think I'm doing great. And they finish and I look up and everybody's looking down like this in the glass, and they go, oh, come in here and let's listen to it. Let's play it back. And they play it back and it's just, it was just horrible. And they're hoping that I will understand that it's horrible by bringing me in to tell me. And I knew that. And I also knew, what are they going to do? Tell me it's terrible? So I just went, I think it sounds great. And then you could see them all go, oh no. And I go, it sucks, bring your guy. And they brought in this guy, Dan Tomensky, to sing it. So he had a beautiful voice. It sounds great. The song, the album won Album of the Year. It beat out U2. Take that, Bono.
And they're doing a special 20th anniversary performance, I believe, this month as well.
Oh, they are?
Very exciting. Partly. Yeah, not you two, but...
Funny that they didn't ask me to come sing.
Did you not get the memo? Oh, awkward.
Maybe you would have kept that to yourself.
I have to mention Holly Hunter as well from
my
this film, because I love her.
I love her. And she wasn't there, and she'd done, Raising Arizona with them. And she showed up late into the shoot, and we were there shooting, and and I was really intimidated because from broadcast news, go down the list. She just, she's this actress that just sort of lights up the room, and she walked in and she's like, so you're my husband, and I was like, yeah, and she's like, okay, well, try not to screw it up, and I was like, okay, and from the very minute she got there, she put me at ease. I'd been there for a couple of months, I think, at that point. But she put me at ease and just said, she just made it fun and funny. And, actors and directors, they have to let people feel at ease to take chances. It's a funny thing, but, otherwise you close down and you're careful. And you don't want people being careful. You want to feel like they can take a chance. And if it doesn't work, take another chance, And actors can do that to other actors really easily, Is that how you're going to play it?
Were you nervous then? Were you still nervous on set at that point?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, look, this was a big deal for me to get this film because this was, the film before it, Three Kings, is a really good movie. But David O. Russell had done a couple of small independent films, and and the movie before that was Out of Sight, and yes, it was exciting and to work with Steven. But the Coen brothers had this long run already. It's interesting, directors. It's a funny thing. You'll be hard pressed to find very many directors whose work is as good at the end of their careers as it is at the beginning. Very few. You can find a few. John Huston, The Dead, and Kurosawa, and there's a few. Soderbergh and I used to talk about this all the time. Their movies are still just as good as they were when they started. As good as Blood Simple. And so it's a really fascinating thing that they're still invested and interested in trying very different things.
Was there a pivotal point where you knew you wanted to direct, that you knew,
back in television I did when I was doing TV, because there's a thing about acting, which is you're still subject to a lot of other things, an editor, a director, pretty much anybody. You can give the performance of your life and they go, it's gone. And so I always liked the idea of having more control over everything, and I watched directors that I respected in television and watched how they worked. And I thought, you know, I remember watching Robert Rodriguez when we did From Dusk Till Dawn, and he had such an interesting, sort of casual way of going about shooting a movie that we had to shoot sort of very quickly, and watching how he how planned and how much he'd already shot the film either in storyboards or in his head. And the Coen brothers storyboard every single shot. So when you get your sides in the morning, every single shot you'll see is storyboarded. And it kind of, in a weird way, tells you how to act. So, you know, so I do that with almost every film. I'll hand in, here's the storyboards, here's the shot list, here's what we're going to do today. It makes it efficient. Everybody knows everybody's working in the same direction. But I always, you know, by the time I got to Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, which was the first thing I directed, I knew sort of specifically that what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, and you know, and what I really never wanted to get caught doing was playing things safe. You know, that was the secret to it. You know.
And what do you think you took from that experience from Confessions onto Good Night and Good Luck, your second film you directed?
Well, Good Night and Good Luck was different in a way, because Good Night and Good Luck was more straightforward.
Oh, you know, and you wrote it as well, so there's that.
Well, and Confessions was, you know, Confessions was I was playing with. I'd grown up around television sets in the Midwest, so I was playing with those things constantly moving. So everything was, there's not a single digital effect in Confessions. It's all done in camera. So if an actor's here and then the camera goes there, the actor has to run around the set and change clothes. You know, so that was all playing with, you know, sets and motion and movement and Good Night, Good Luck I wrote because I was, you know, being picketed for being against the war. And, you know, people forget this now because it's all very easy because everybody says, oh, yes, it was a terrible mistake. But, you know, in 2003 and 2004, there was like 5 or 6 of us, you know, saying this is a terrible idea. And everybody else who thought it was keeping quiet because they were really raising hell. And I had a very famous director come up to me and say, I agree. And I was like, why are you whispering? And I just remember that feeling of like, of the idea that the most patriotic thing you can do in the world is question your government. I believe it, and I will always believe it. I was raised as the son of a newsman. And so I believed in that, and I thought, well, let's look at other times when the Fourth Estate, the press, was failing to hold the other 3 estates to account. And I thought that the McCarthy era was a good time, and I was aware of the Murrow stuff. So I wanted to write it, a bit of a tribute to my father and a bit of a way of attacking the people who say that the understanding that without those other 3 estates don't matter at all if the Fourth Estate doesn't stand up. You know, that's the most important one. I think it was Jefferson that said, given the option of a government without a press or with a press, I'll take the press. It's that important. So and that's what drove me to do it. Shot it quick, shot it in 24 days, you know, and that was it was an odd shoot all the way around. Everybody there was just up for it, you know. And we would give all the young actors who were playing, you know, Murrow's boys, we'd give them a newspaper in the morning. A newspaper from the New York Times, 1954, you know, on a Thursday. And they would sit, when they come to work in the morning, they'd sit and drink a coffee, and they'd pull a story out, and they'd type it out, and then they'd come in, and then we'd have 2 cameras hidden in the projection room, and I played Fred Friendly, and I'd say, pitch me your show, pitch me your story. And then we'd roll, and they would, because they owned it then, and they would pitch me their stories. And it really made it exciting that they owned all of the kind of news that they wanted. And so that part of it that was improvised was really exciting.
Was it, did you know when you were writing it in terms of how you wanted it to look visually? Because it's such a stylish looking film as well. But it wasn't shot in black and white, was it?
We shot, you know, it would take so many lights and it would take so much longer to actually shoot it on black and white film. But I talked to, Joel and Ethan had shot The Man Who Wasn't There in color and then desatted it into black and white. And I talked to David Fincher about some of the things about like how can you defocus without making it soft, and he was saying, told me if you shoot it on color and take out the red channels, you can actually soften the lens without it looking like it's defocused. And so, so I knew I wanted it to be black and white because we only know those people in black and white. And the minute you see them in color, it throws you. You're like, oh, I don't know any of these characters in color. And because I wanted to use McCarthy as himself, and he was in black and white, and it would have been really jarring to see between that and color. So I knew that. I'd written it to play the part of Murrow, funnily enough.
Had you?
Yeah. And then as an actor, you go, yeah. And then as a director, you go, I'm the wrong guy to play the part. You know, I didn't have enough age on me, and I didn't have enough, Murrow always felt like, there's a sadness to him that people don't necessarily ascribe to me often. And so I started thinking about people, and it was David Strathairn. But the funny thing was, I sent him the script. He said he'd love to do it. And then we didn't talk to him for a couple of months, and he showed up the day before we started to shoot. He's got long white hair, And I'm like, I don't know if we made a right choice or anything. And he cut his hair and dyed it black, and he got a cigarette, and he leaned in for the camera test. He's like, good evening. And I was like, we got our guy, and David, if David didn't work, the movie didn't work, and David made the movie work. He was the key to it.
I just saw him in Nomadland with Frances McDormand.
How is it? How's that movie? The movie looks great.
It's stunning.
Frances,
Absolutely
too.
Stunning.
Frances is just...
Yeah. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you. Is it easy to cast yourself in roles?
Well, it depends on the role. This one, Midnight Sky, the funny thing about it was I'm kind of, there's only a couple other guys for a film that you got to have a name for. There are only a couple other guys that could really do it. This one, there weren't that many people. The guys that I sort of, Matt Damon or Brad Pitt or they're too young for it, and I'm only a couple of years older than them, but I'm a little well-worn, I suppose. And it just felt like there weren't many other people that were the right age for this, in the right place in their career to do it. So that one was easy. There've been other ones where, I had to find something to do. Confessions, I made myself the CIA, and I love doing that. But for the most part, it's a real drag directing yourself. I mean, it's what a horrible egotistical thing to have to do. If you and I were doing a scene as an actor and actress, and we're talking and we're doing the scene, it would be a horrible. There are some actors that do it, but it'd be a horrible thing for me to say, yeah, maybe if you said your line a little faster next time. Try to do it with a little more like sadness at the end. And it's a terrible thing for one actor to say to the other actor. And yet I will be doing a scene with, an actress and be talking and then go and cut, and I'll go, and it's a wall you really hate to break, and it's, so you have to really have a solid understanding with the actors of what you're doing. And, luckily I just had Kaylin, who'd never acted before in this movie, so she didn't know when I said, close your eyes and cry.
Did a great job in the Ides of March as well. I love that film. So great. So good. So good. That's the brilliant thing I love about one of the things I admire what you were talking about earlier about having a voice and and not being scared to talk about things or go there with subjects and stuff. And I think that with a lot of your films, I feel that there's almost there's so many layers to it. There's that kind of top layer of it's entertainment, but when you peel back the layers, there's some really interesting narrative and it's saying something a lot of the time as well. And
sometimes, it's not, the intention is always that it has to be entertaining. I don't want to do a preachy film, but also the fun part about it is, I grew up with the films of the 60s and 70s. And if you think about them I used to give my friends, this is when you gave out, DVDs, 100 DVDs of films from 1964 to 1976. because that was sort of the era for particularly American films, although not all American films. 1964, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold is a masterpiece. And, you know, Dr. Strangelove and Failsafe, that's all 1964. But the kind of, even the programmers like 3 Days of the Condor and The Parallax View were just great films. People forget that movies like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, they get shot to death in the end, you know? I mean, movies were not, you know, they dealt with oftentimes very serious subjects. They dealt with the, you know, the civil rights movement or the Vietnam movement or the drug counterculture, the women's movement. There's so many things going on. And they would deal with them in really interesting ways. And I feel like that's what is fun to do in film, you know, without making it about that. Parallax View is about paranoia, you know.
Yeah. The Deer Hunter actually is a film for me that really was the first time that I'd kind of seen film really when I was starting to kind of watch
films when I shouldn't have been, when I was too young to watch.
You're too young, like that, you're too young to watch that film.
Yeah,
that's a pretty violent.
Oh,
film.
Dad's got a copy of this. What's this? Let's watch it.
Oh yeah. Hey, Caligula. Whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, it's
Russian roulette, Mum.
Yeah.
But with Good Night and Good Luck,
it's you know, it's ironic how much the narrative of media responsibility and TV broadcast journalism so relevant to right now in terms of, you know, like you say, being accountable and having people that you know are striving to find the truth is
well, it's an interesting
more
thing.
Important than ever.
Well, because at that time, the one thing that's hugely different, some of it's the fault of the internet and some of it's the fault of, you know, the way we've moved in the last 15 years or so, which is that at the very least, in the United States, we had 3 channels: ABC, NBC, CBS for television news. They all started with the same set of facts. And then you at home, depending on whether you were conservative or liberal or wherever you stood in the world, you took those facts in and you digested them and made your decisions based on the same set of facts. So that we weren't always that far apart. You know, sometimes we were very far apart because we completely disagreed on Vietnam. If you were a World War II vet, you hated the young hippie kids and all that stuff. But in general, we were still starting with the same set of facts. That's completely different now. You know, the facts are, you know, you can, you know, there's all this, you know, QAnon stuff where it's, you know, just insanity where people are saying, you know, I mean, we have the President of the United States right now trying to say that, you know, our mail-in ballots could be fraudulent when, of course, it's a felony to do it. And, you know, there have been something like 9 actual frauds of mail-in ballots, of a single mail-in ballot over the last 40 years. It's a billion votes. It's pretty, you know, it's just, we're working with different sets of facts. And I worry about that because, you know, it makes people very sure of themselves in a sometimes, you know, it's like the guy who shows up at Pizzagate. He shows up at the pizza place because he thinks there's a bunch of pedophiles in the basement. There's no basement. There's no pedophiles. And he shoots off his gun in a pizza restaurant, you know. So I do worry about that. It was easier, I suppose, in terms of truth. Getting it out and absorbing it may have been different and trickier, obviously.
And a character, lovely kind of link into a character whose mission is to unveil the truth with Michael Clayton, which, I mean, I wanted to ask you with regards to when you read Tony's screenplay from this, because when you watch that film back, it just is so striking how brilliant a story it is.
It's funny, it was actually based on, here's how crazy this is. It was based on the Ford Pinto. There was a car called the Ford Pinto that would, if you hit it from behind, the gas tank would blow up and, you know, and kill everybody. And there was the whole idea was that the people at who were working then for Ford, they had an internal memo that said, look, it's going to cost us, you know, $700 million to recall all those cars, or if we absorb the 12 people that die a year, the class action suit would cost us $40 million. And our advice is to absorb that. Now, he didn't put that in the movie because there's, you know, a million complications to it. But it was based on that idea of, you know, sort of that the corporation, the answer is, well, it's sort of like using algorithms now, where you just go, well, the algorithm says it's cheaper to do this. And you go, yes, but algorithms are life. You know, we're talking about real people. I mean, you talk about algorithms now, they don't know what's true. And so they will spread the lie much quicker. And so it's some of that in it. And I thought that was a really fascinating project to take on in the way that Tony took it on. I thought he did a beautiful job with it.
Yeah, I am. And the same DOP as well that you'd worked with on Good Night and
Good Luck as well.
I've worked with Robert, I don't know, I think on 7 or 8 films. He did Syriana. I mean, I love working with Robert. He's one of the greats in the business and a really smart, fun guy to work with. Yes, and he still sends me hysterical pictures of, like, you know, of working on when we were working on Good Night and Good Luck, where it's just all of us with our bad air.
I wanted to ask about what was in the script for that ending for Michael Clayton, because, you know, you're in the back of that car, the cab, and that beautiful piece of James Newton Howard's score, and it's almost like a short film.
Yeah.
That little, I mean, it's maybe 45 seconds a minute, I don't know, but it's
longer. It's actually longer than that.
It's incredible, but
so
I wondered, because it's almost like another ending to the film in a way.
It wasn't in the script.
It's so clever.
So it wasn't in the script at all. And Tony and I were talking about it, and it was sort of like, the idea was the end of The Graduate, right? When you watch the end of The Graduate and they get in the back of the bus and they're like, woohoo! And that's usually you'd fade to black and they lived happily ever after. But they just stay with them. And it's like, woo, woo. And then slowly it comes to realization that this is what their life is. And they stayed with them a long, long time. And it's such a beautiful moment. And Tony and I talked about it. And so we came up with this plan. But we were shooting in downtown Manhattan in the middle of the day. And we have, you know, it's a cab that we're in, but we've got all these giant lights on it, you know, huge pounding lights on it for, you know, moving a camera mount on the top of it. And there's one car in front of us, and we put one car behind us. But we hadn't, because we hadn't really planned for the shot. We didn't know what we were going to do. We're stealing the location. Usually you'd have them shut down the street and all of the cars would be extras driving the car, or background artists driving the car, you know, that kind of thing. But we didn't do it. We just stole it. So that means if we get caught at a light so I'm in the back, brightly lit, writing, and and basically what you're trying to do is just be still, you know, just be still, but everybody around who's driving by me is going, hey, George Clooney, what are you doing? Look at you. And then you get stopped at a light and they go, look at me, George, look over here. I'm taking a picture of you. Hey, George Clooney. The whole time. So in that last minute and a half or whatever it is longer, all I'm trying to do is not laugh. Literally. The whole time, all I'm trying to do is not laugh. But the funny thing about that is, it's really easy. If you put that shot at the beginning of the movie, it'd be the most boring shot in the history of film, you know. But because we've gone through this whole ride with the film, everybody puts what they feel they've taken away from the film onto me. And so it works beautifully, because they just go, oh, look, there he's feeling about now he's free, or there he's feeling, you know, as he ruined his life. And they play the whole movie out on that, which is a funny thing, because, you know, all I'm trying to do is not laugh. I'm not kidding. Because, you know, like, look over here. Oh,
it's amazing. I'd love to see like outtakes of that.
We only did it once. We just stole it and ran.
Wow.
We got out of town.
Between doing Michael Clayton and The Descendants, it's like 4 years. The films you released was, I mean, an amazing collection. Fantastic Mr. Fox, which we watched again with the kids recently.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah.
Such a great film.
Yeah. Well, he's a brilliant director.
Up in the air.
Yeah.
Ides of March. It's just, yeah.
And another Ocean's. We haven't even talked about those yet. I mean, those are just like, it's like putting on a comfortable pair of slippers and going, right, come on, here we go.
Well, all the guys felt that way too. That was the fun of doing it, was from the very beginning, the minute we all got in a room together, what was so great about those three Ocean's films was that the actors are actively trying to give the scene to the other actor. Nobody's trying to grab stuff, and because of it, it works. Because it's just like, no, that's your scene. You take that, and so there's no, and it felt fun to. It was always fun to shoot because we had the easiest time. Steven Soderbergh had to work hard, but we had the easiest time. But yeah, those were fun, and Up in the Air was a really interesting and fun film to do because Jason wanted to, try to play off of what people sort of assumed about me. The guy that doesn't want to get married and get rid of everything that holds you down. And I think that was some of the take on it. It was funny because he came to my house in Italy and he said, "I want you to read the script," and I read it. And he went upstairs and I read it, and I came back down and I said, "I know what this is. I know what you're doing." And I said, "But it's okay." He said, "Okay."
But that's the great thing I think about, you don't take yourself too seriously. You have fun with things. You can see that in like, particularly, like you say with the Coen brothers and stuff, and they see that side of you of kind of, we can play with him because he can and he will and he wants to.
Well, they also, I mean, look, everybody will always say, take your work seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. I mean, it's really true. There is such a dangerous place in thinking that you have all the answers, or thinking that you're, anything part of you taking yourself too seriously is actually almost always a mistake, almost always. There's some times when it isn't, but almost always it's a mistake. And it's so much more fun to be able to, when Coen Brothers will send me a movie about, like Burn After Reading, where I'm building a sex machine in the basement, and you're completely like perverted sexual coward. And I read it and I'm like, okay. Those are the things we just go, yeah, of course. That's of course who I should be here. I mean, it's fun that way. And it's fun to be able to play those kind of parts. It makes it tricky, bouncing from part to part. But again, I think it's because I didn't have that much success that, they let me. But those were all big, those were all movies that were fun to make too, all of those.
Yeah.
Ides was really fun to make because, I got to work with Phil Hoffman on, one of his last projects, and to have Phil Hoffman and Paul Giamatti sort of facing off against each other was good fun.
Yeah.
And those guys, you just put the quarter in and sit back and let them go. And they're just, I miss
that's
him
a la carte, that, isn't it? Definitely.
Yeah.
Was The Descendants a fun film to make?
Yeah. Yes. Well, we're in Hawaii. What's wrong with that? It was fun on a number of levels. It was fun because, again, there's funny things about it. I'm kind of a jock. I played sports, and I still play a lot of sports and stuff. So even like running like a goose in those flip-flops.
Oh my God, so great. Such a great scene.
Made us laugh, when we were doing it. So the idea of emasculating me, I liked a lot. I like the idea of saying, let's take the idea that, if someone gave you a gun, you could handle it, that kind of thing, and that your wife was cheating on you and loved the other guy, and that your kids don't like you, and that you're still, and you're kind of hapless in a way, and how you have to find, your way to some peace, along the way. And I just loved that character. I loved it was one of my favorite characters to play because, Shailene just She's such a beautiful actress, and she and I we're still very close. I mean, she's still my daughter. She's gone on to become a big star. I don't give a shit. She's still my daughter. I love her so much, and she just, she made the scenes that we did together really simple because she was such a professional at such a young age. It was fun to do.
I think that the two of them with Amara as well as Scotty, it was just a brilliant casting in terms of the differences that siblings can, the characters, the difference in characters and stuff. She was a little firecracker, Amara. She was brilliant to watch.
Yeah,
as well.
It was funny. One day I don't think she'd acted in it much, if anything, before that. And, you learn as an actor certain tricks, right? Okay, we're going to do a scene where we all have to eat turkey around the table, right? So we don't just plow in and eat a bunch of turkey because you're going to do 4 different shots of it and many takes. And you can't eat turkey all day, right? We did a scene with her where they put a big thing of ice cream in front of her. She's never worked before. First take, ate the whole thing. 2, 3 more takes. She's happy. She's like, bring it on. Ate it. So we wrapped at like noon. Literally. It was like, we can't finish shooting. She's like, sick as a dog. And we couldn't work with her. So she learned her first real true acting lesson right there.
I loved hearing you talk about kind of the rhythm of a film, but even the kind of location of a place can have a rhythm that you have to kind of adjust to, and the idea of like, I guess a great kind of contrast would be kind of Michael Clayton, like you were talking about earlier, and those kind of fast streets of New York with the cars and things, whereas this is the polar opposite, I guess. But in terms of, as an actor, you have to find the rhythm of that location that you're in, and
it takes a second, because what you learn is you get off of so you fly into, Honolulu. And by the way, some of the worst traffic I've ever been in is in Honolulu, on a freeway in Honolulu. But, you got your rental car and you get in the car and you're driving to the hotel, and the guy in front of you, it's freeway, is driving 40 miles an hour. And you're like, are you kidding me? Are you crazy? And like, you're honking the horn, you won't get out of the way. Finally, you get around them, you're like, what's wrong with you? And they're like, dude, shaka bra, slow down. And you're like, and after about 3 days, you're like, you're driving 40 miles an hour on the freeway, and you don't, it's island life. And it taught you a lot about actually, living life a little more and not being in such a rush. Living in Italy has done that for me. I have a place in Italy that I spend the summers in, usually, not this summer, but, and they live their lives differently than I was doing. I was eating lunch standing up for 25 years. I was in a rush. And, you'd see these guys coming home from work with like a bottle of wine and bread, and they're singing, and they're going to have a, 3-hour dinner. And you go, oh, I'm not living the way I should. I should be celebrating dinners and celebrating, the time that you have off and things like that. So Italy taught me a lot about that too.
I wanted to ask, just before we finish up, run out of time, about actors that you admired, kind of when you were starting out. And I heard you talk a little bit about Paul Newman, and particularly from The Verdict, and a specific scene within that where he's in court. And but I would love to know if there were specific actors that you really admired and looked to for, not for.
You mean when I was
advice.
when I was young, or when I first? Because I have to
does
say,
it ever stop? Do you still? Are you?
Yeah, you're still learning. I'm still
I love-
starstruck by certain actors, and I got a note from Robert Redford the other day, and I went upstairs and showed it to them all. I go, note from Robert Redford, who did some of the most interesting films of the certainly the late 60s and all through the 70s as anybody's ever done. There were a lot of guys. Newman was a big influence on me because he was really funny, and because we had a very funny relationship late in life. for him. And you know, I directed a movie that just completely bombed called Leatherheads, just a huge bomb, critical bomb and box office bomb. And he was still racing at the time, and he'd raced a car and crashed it. And so he took a picture of the car that he'd crashed, and he superimposed the poster of Leatherheads on his crashed car and said, "I was driving your car in the race." You know, he was, you know, he had a great sense of humor, and he also had such dignity and character and poise, and did all the things that, you know, he was a delegate for McCarthy at the '68 elections, and he was a really involved, a guy who was really involved, and still, you know, had fun. We were going to do The Notebook together, interestingly, and we'd been sent the script, and we read it, and we were like, "This is the one. We can do this together." I would play him as a young man, you know. I think it was Ryan Gosling and James Garner did it later, many years later. And it was funny. We met, and we were like, "Okay, this is it. It's over at Warner Brothers. We're going to do this. It's going to be great." And then I went home, and I was watching like The Sting or Butch Cassidy. It's one of those where it's, you know, he's the handsomest guy you've ever seen with these bright blue eyes, and he's my age, you know. He was 35 or something, you know. So maybe it was something earlier than that. And we went back, we met up, had dinner, and I said, "I can't play you as he. Everybody knows what you look like. I don't look anything like you." You know, I said, "This is insane. We just wanted to do it because we wanted to work together and stuff." So it ended up not being the right thing for us to do. But he, you know, he certainly. I was also very good friends with Gregory Peck and his wife Veronique. Went to their houses for dinners and things. Gregory was the epitome of gentleman, and also he did projects with great integrity. He had integrity. He stood for things outside of his business that mattered, which I like to do. And he was sort of an example of who I would, you know, if someone said, you know, give me the best of Hollywood, I'd say Gregory Peck and Paul Newman. You know, that's the best of them. There are others I loved Spencer Tracy, but, you know, he'd get pretty hammered and break up the place, you know. You know, and then actors much later, you know, down the road, there have been plenty of actors I've worked with that were helpful. John Turturro was really nice and kind to me on Oh Brother, I Was Nervous. He'd done a bunch of Coen Brothers movies, and so I was nervous, and he came over and he's like, "I got you, don't worry." And you know, he made his character so big that there was nothing I could do to be too big, you know.
I do love seeing you as well with you know, like you were talking about your amazing co-star in the new film, but like in Money Monster with Jack O'Connell.
I love Jack. What a good young actor he is.
It's great to see that, you know, kind of. I've loved watching you two together on that.
Well, I love him. He's a you know, it's one of those things where you keep waiting to see what's going to be the part that sort of busts him out. Because, you know, I was 33 when ER hit, and that was sort of the thing for me. I had 12 pilots and 7 other television series before that, and, you know, wasn't blowing the roof off of anybody. And then ER came around, and great time slot, and it was a great show, and I got to ride that ride. Jack's, you know, one of those gigs away from being, you know, a big name. He is a spectacular actor, though.
Yeah. Right, before we finish, if you're going to write something, direct, I mean, you've got so many jobs that you can do now, producing, directing, writing, and acting.
Yes.
How do you know what you're going to do on each project?
Well, it depends. Usually writing is something that I've got an idea of what I want to do. Like Ides of March, there was a play called Farragut North that I wanted to redo and rearrange, and I had an idea of what I wanted it to be. So writing that was easy. Good Night and Good Luck was very specifically, I wanted to write that one because I was, I'd written it as a live television show because we'd done Failsafe live. And then Janet Jackson got naked on live TV at the Super Bowl and CBS canceled us. So then we made it into a film. But
Is that what happened?
yeah,
Oh
that's
man.
exactly what happened.
Wow.
But in general, I think about, if you're going to direct something, it's 2 years out of your life. I mean, really, it's a year and a half anyway out of your life. And so it has to be something you're really excited about. So it has to be something unique and different and out there. Doesn't always mean they're going to work, but it does mean that they're certainly not, you wouldn't look down the things that I've done and said, oh, those are, those weren't big swings, And so that's part of what I enjoy is like going, oh, I want to try this. And so directing that. Acting, it has to be a character that interests me, and it has to be a director that I want to work with. That's hard to find at times. Because there's a lot of directors that I just go, I'm not going to do 50 takes, of me walking in a door. Yeah. I'm not going to, and I'm never going to be on a set where the director is, a jerk to everybody. Life's, we're lucky, right? I'm lucky. I hit the jackpot. I get to sort of pick the jobs. I was a struggling actor for 15 years, and I didn't get to pick anything. You just, any job you got, thank you, thank you, thank you. And you show up and some guy's a jerk and you're like, I don't care. I got a job. I'm getting paid. I'm paying the rent. I'm thrilled to be here. If you get lucky enough to be able to pick and to be part of the process and eventually to be the sort of the leader of the process, it's lucky. You should be celebrating. Anybody who's angry or upset in that position needs some therapy. We get to play make-believe and somebody pays us to do it. I cut tobacco for a living for $3.33 an hour. And I knew one thing when I left Kentucky, which was I didn't want to be a tobacco cutter. I was pretty sure of that. And so everything on top of that has been gravy for me. And so that's why I tend to find it silly when people are tortured by it. Doesn't mean that they don't have rough times and something doesn't make somebody mad, but I'm just talking about a general overall spirit should be exciting. I mean, yeah, so I remember bringing Good Night and Good Luck to the closing night of London Film Festival. And I remember the feeling of sitting in the audience and them getting it, them understanding that it wasn't just about McCarthy, them understanding that it was about dissent, and understanding that that's key at a moment when, I was in London for the march when they were marching against the war, and then I was in Germany the same day. I'd flown to Germany where they were marching in favor of their government for being against the war. I'd been around where dissent, is a huge part of it. And to sit in that room with everybody in their tuxedos and feel film people get it, there's nothing more exciting than that, honestly. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's the sad part about us not being able to be on a stage right now and in front of. I must say, I think the London Film Festival is such a beautiful film festival, and they show such beautiful films, and they put it on beautifully. But it is a fantastic thing to sit in that theater with everybody and watch movies, and I miss that, and I wish we were all able to do that right now.
Soon, I hope. Soon.
Yeah.
George, thank you so much
for being here and
spending time talking us, snippets from all these wonderful films you've been part of.
Well, thank you, Edith. You're always a fantastic interview, and I hope soon we'll all be able to do it in person because this is a little sad, quite honestly.
And excited, who knows? Maybe by the time we get to December, we can watch The Midnight Sky on a big screen, but it's going to be available for everybody in December, and I'm very excited for everybody to see it. George, take care, stay safe, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody at the festival. Thank you.